Hi, everyone. This week we are going to be talking about 18th century satire, so let's jump right in. So first, let's talk about Jonathan Swift. He's born in 1667 and lives until 1745. He's born in Dublin, and he's actually born 7 months after his father died. His father was away working as a lawyer with his uncle, and he died of syphilis. And then his Swift's uncle ends up becoming sort of his benefactor. He not, I mean, literally his benefactor. He sends him to Kilkenny College, which is a secondary boarding school. And then later, Swift goes to Trinity College, where he gets his bachelor's. Then he goes to Oxford for his master's. Then he goes back to Trinity for his doctorate in divinity studies. So he had a lot of education. So for a while, he worked for Sir William Temple. This was through family connections and things he was able to get this position. And he was pretty ambitious. There seems to be a lot when I'm reading biographies and things of him where he really wanted to have, like, he was really vying for positions and things like that. And it seems like he kind of was repeatedly frustrated by where he was working and who he was working with. I think he wanted something grander. Um, but anyway, so he works for William Temple. When Temple dies, there's some like really dramatic quotes about like how he said that everything good left the world with Temple. At the same time, Temple was seemingly pretty limiting in terms of the type of stuff that Swift was writing, maybe just because of what he was encouraging him to write. So Swift, when he was working for Temple, he was writing a lot of like poetry, sounds like even like kind of positive poetry. And then when Temple dies, Swift starts writing his satires, which are going to be what makes him so famous, right? Um, he did develop Meniere's disease. I might be pronouncing that wrong. It's French, at a pretty early age, actually. And this is an inner ear problem that can cause dizzy spells, vertigo, and hearing loss. And so this was something that was going to impact his life in a lot of ways. It ended up having effects where, like, there were certain jobs that he couldn't do and things like that. But he ends up still being, successful. And then he becomes, kind of his main thing is that he becomes the dean of St. Patrick's Cathedral. And this was so much a part of his identity is that I can't remember the name that they gave him a nickname. It was like Dean Swift or Dean Patrick or something like that. Okay. I read too many biographies today, let me tell you. So let's talk about A Modest Proposal. So I don't know if you've read this before. I think I read this in high school, maybe in a literature class. I can't remember. But I just remember the first time I read this, kind of the gasp when it got to, I think, around line 60, where it finally reveals what it's actually about. And so, it starts with this like very kind of like gentle rhetoric, right? Where it's kind of leading you into like, wow, this person is so reasonable. Wow, I can tell they really care about the poor population in Ireland. Oh my goodness, yeah, this is so moving. I can't wait to get to their proposal. And then once you get to the proposal, it's literally eating babies, right? Which is just like the most horrifying thing that could be suggested. And so we can see this is a satire, right? We've seen other works that are satires. You could think like Canterbury Tales, for example. But this is going to be just one of the longest extended pieces of irony probably ever, because we have with the title A Modest Proposal, which is obviously it's not modest, so there's irony there, all the way to the end, where he's like almost like apologetic with his tone. It's like so humble. It's just very ironic, right? And so, again, though, just as a reminder, satire is going to be a work in which human or individual vices, follies, abuses, or shortcomings are held up to censure by means of ridicule, derision, burlesque, irony, parody, caricature, or other methods, sometimes with an intent to inspire social reform. Okay? And this is specifically going to be a bit of a parody on a treatise. And so, this is going to be something that's written by what were referred to as benevolent humanitarians. This was a familiar figure at the time, and this is going to be kind of like a precursor to what we would think of as like a sociologist or, somebody who's doing that kind of work that we would see as being like beneficial to society. They're trying to find solutions. And so he's really trying to imitate that kind of style. And so I think it makes it even that much more ironic, right? Another thing that you might, if you're kind of interested in learning more about satire, I'd really recommend looking more into the types of satire. One is, and you know what? I should have looked up the pronunciation of this. It's Juvenalian, I think is how it's pronounced, satire. And this is going to be bitter and ironic criticism of contemporary persons and institutions that is filled with personal invective, angry moral indignation, and pessimism. Okay. So the two major types of satire are Horatian, which is like a little bit lighter, funnier, like witty, and then Juvenalian, which is going to be like biting, harsh, pessimistic, angry, And so this is an example of Juvenalian satire. So even though I think this is kind of funny, like sometimes even laugh out loud funny because it's so over the top, um, it's a big indictment of the society at the time and the very serious issues going on. So it's kind of nice to contrast these two works that we're going to talk about a little bit later, Pope's work, because they are so different, even though there are so many similarities. But like a lot of the difference lies in that tone and that what they're targeting in terms of what they're mocking, um, you know, uh, criticizing. Okay, so another thing to know about this is that this was originally published as a pamphlet. Pamphlets are like, I don't know, I don't think they're a big thing anymore. They were really popular though in the 1700s. And the way that I've mostly learned about these, since I mostly, have studied like American history, is like for example, the Federalist Papers. So if you ever listened to Hamilton or watched the musical Hamilton, they talk about the Federalist Papers. And this is where they're having these political arguments and making kind of like, sort of like a, I don't know, like manifesto or like proposals and things like that about what they think the government should be and how things should be run and blah, blah, blah. And so basically they're like kind of short booklets, not books where it's like a hardcover or anything, but like these short booklets where you can pretty easily distribute information and ideas. And so again, this is just one more way that this is I think kind of funny because again, it's participating in this like potentially very serious discourse, even in its form of a pamphlet. All right, so let's talk about themes. Back to this idea of this sort of like angry, pessimistic, biting commentary in this satire. Um, Keep in mind that what Swift is talking about, so he's Irish, right? And I don't know how much you know about the history of Ireland. In England, we talked a little bit about it when we talked about Spencer. But basically, England repeatedly colonizes Ireland throughout history, okay? And in the Tudor era, Henry VIII, he declared the Kingdom of Ireland and himself the King of Ireland. And they started going into Ireland and doing what's called the Tudor conquest of Ireland, where they were basically just like taking land. And remember, the Tudors are Protestants, and it's the Anglican Church, right, that Henry VIII establishes. So they're going in, they're taking this land away from like Catholic landowners, and then they are giving it to Protestants. And a lot of these Protestants, by the way, are English. And so what ends up happening is that Ireland isn't necessarily like a wonderful place to live potentially if you're English, because there's a lot of like negative sentiment, hostility from the people of Ireland. And also, I don't know, your friends and everything are in England. I don't know. High society might be in England. So anyway, so a lot of these landowners, they didn't actually live in Ireland. They just bought all this land and then they lease it. They rent it to people who live in Ireland. And then those people rent it to other people who live in Ireland, and those people rent it. And so it ends up becoming like layers of this land just being rented to people who actually want to live there from these absentee landlords in England. Okay. And there's a line in Swift's essay, he talks about barreled beef. I don't know if that caught your attention at all, because I was like, what is this about? But what he's talking about there is the fact that a lot of the food that they would actually like, a lot of the food that was in Ireland, including animal meat, would be shipped to England. Meanwhile, Ireland doesn't really have enough food, and they don't really have enough money either. Like there aren't jobs because the type of jobs that would probably exist in Ireland would be agricultural jobs where people are working the land to support these landowners, but the landowners don't live there. And so there just aren't that many jobs because there's they're not there's not money to create these big farms and give the people there to give the people their jobs. So a lot of the people are just kind of living there and then growing food on small plots of land. And so repeatedly, there's just a huge cycle of poverty from this colonization. Okay. Um, and so anyway, that seems to be a big, the big theme of what Swift is criticizing in this essay, where he is very critical of these absentee landlords who are clearly sort of dooming the Irish people, where they can't have jobs, there isn't food, and or at least not enough food. And meanwhile, they're like living these high class lifestyles. And so the proposal here, right, is that they will take the babies of the poor. And again, he's also going to draw attention to, even though he is Protestant, this anti-Catholic sentiment that's going on, by saying especially that Catholic people would even have more babies. You know, and then they'll take them and sell them to the rich to eat, right? And it's so disgusting. Like obviously like the most disgusting suggestion of all time. It's repulsive. And it's repulsive on so many levels because, people shouldn't have to uh think about lives this way, right? And so if you're looking at, starving children and everything, the solution should probably you shouldn't have to look at them as another mouth to feed, essentially, right? And you can tell with a lot of the language that Swift is using in this essay that he is, I think, pretty angry because when he's talking about these Irish people, he's talking about them like cattle, right? He's using the words for like birth, to give birth, the way we would talk about it if a person is giving birth, is switched out for language describing how animals give birth, right? And so there's just like a lot of dehumanizing and things like that. And Swift doesn't feel this way, right? He's being ironic. He's being like angry ironic too, remember? So this isn't supposed to be like, haha, isn't that funny to think about that? It's like, ugh, we're being dehumanized, we're being starved, we can't live like this. And it's because of these like wealthy absentee landlords, right? And I will just add that some of the stuff that I've read too, even though he is so critical of these like these English landlords or whatever. Um, there is also like seems to be some criticism towards or frustration with Irish people as well, like that they aren't handling this kind of situation well too. And so, but it doesn't seem like that's the focus to me, at least. It seems like it is like a pretty cutting criticism of these landlords. Okay, if you want to read more about this, I have a bunch of links in here. But basically, I'm going to get to this a little bit more in a second. Remember, we've been talking about like all this anti-Catholic sentiment. There's these penal laws that are, or, these acts that are being, passed, whatever. And they keep basically taking away the rights of Catholic people to have, and also Protestant dissenters, so people who are Puritans, for example, taking away their rights to things like education, certain types of employment. The one in 1727, which is the year before this is published, is that they can't vote. So there's like all of these different things that are happening that are basically just like slowly stripping well, I don't know about slowly, they're stripping the rights away from Catholic people, right? And so yeah, and so this I think is a pretty big theme in this work, right? And so even though again, Swift is Protestant, there is a lot of he's clearly calling out the anti-Catholic behavior, right? Okay, so we're going to move on. Let's move on to Alexander Pope. So he is born in 1688 and lives to 1744. He and Swift are so similar. I just can't. It's like this is part of the reason why I get confused with when I was talking about Swift's biography is because they're so similar. The overlap in their timelines is so stark. Like they die not that far away, like far apart from each other, time-wise. But there are a lot of differences too. So, for example, Alexander Pope is born to a wealthy linen merchant who's retired, but he's Catholic. So he can't go to college, he can't vote, he can't hold public office. He has all of these things stripping his rights away where he can't I can't think of what it's called. He can't have a patron, right? People can't he has all of these barriers to success. And on top of that, at 12 years old, he gets Pott's disease, which is a form of bone tuberculosis, and it affects his spinal column. And so he ends up becoming, quite short, and he has like curvature of a spine, like I think what's it called? Like a hunched back or humpback or something. And so it's affecting him not just in his like stature, appearance, or anything, but he also was having a lot of pain. And he was still able to do, I was like reading so many biographies, he's still able to do things they said, like he's able to ride a horseback and he went on vacation a lot. But there's certain like jobs he can't take, and there's certain types of like activities that he can't really do. It seems like what he would say is that he was pouring his energy into his writing. And the thing is, I think a lot of writers would probably say that, but this is accompanied by so much pain that he would also describe, like agonizing headaches and things like that. Despite this, he was a pretty popular guy, it seems like. And, despite the fact that he's Catholic, right? Because there was so much anti-Catholic sentiment. He had friends with like a lot of other literary people. So he and Swift are part of what's called the Scriblerus Club, which is, I can't believe I haven't heard of this before because that's just too fun of a name. And basically they create this character who they kind of like write their satire through the lens of, or like, I don't know how to describe it, but like kind of in character. And then kind of the thing that's significant about Pope, other than just the fact that he is like um extremely good at brief little, I can't think of what it's called. I just looked it up. Um I'll think of it in a second. It's like epigrams, but there's another word for it. Zoigmas, I think is what it's called. But so he's really famous for that. But he's really famous. He's known for kind of more broadly as the first English writer to build a lucrative lifelong career by publishing his works. And it's kind of funny because when I was reading that, I thought, well, didn't we just talk about this with Afroben? But I guess the difference is that Pope is like kind of wealthy from his writing. And I do have to question like how much of that, I mean, there's a little bit of like a my skepticism about bootstraps mentality here, I think, because I'm like, well, but weren't his parents wealthy? But regardless, this is what I've read about him in so many biographies, is that he was able to buy this like grand house and everything through his own earnings after he published translations of Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. And so once he made money from that, which was like hugely lucrative apparently, he purchased the villa at Twickenham. And then Swift actually visited him there for a while, and then Pope died, and then Swift died shortly after that. Okay. So I want to talk about the rape of the lock. First of all, I I almost want to give like a warning because it's not about a literal rape. And the word rape is just so shocking. It's coming from another word. And you know what? Let me look it up. All right, it's coming from the Latin word, I think, rapere, which means to basically steal. And so this is going to be a mock epic. This is, I'm not gonna lie, this is one of my favorite favorite things that I read when I was in college. It's a form of satire that adapts the elevated heroic style of the classical epic poem. So things that we've just read, like Milton, Paradise Lost, or even, like Beowulf or something. And then it's applying it though, all of these heroic, epic, traditions to tropes, right? To a trivial subject. And so what's funny about this is that the poem is about a woman whose hair, a lock of her hair is stolen by her suitor. Okay. But the way that Pope writes about it, it sounds like Helen of Troy being kidnapped and starting the Trojan War, right? And so those are the kinds of exaggerations that he's using throughout this poem. And so I have like a little bit of stuff I want to kind of point out to you that it's doing. There's so many other things we could point out. And so if you are curious about how this is making fun of the epic form, or like mocking the epic form, I guess I should say, it's a parody. There's so much written about this, and I can definitely refer you to more. But it says most mock epics begin with an invocation of the muse, which we have here, and use the familiar epic device of set speeches, which we do have in uh, the cave. I can't think what it's called. Supernatural interventions, which we have through the sylphs, and descents to the underworld, which again, Cave of Spleen, I think is what it's called, right? As well as infinitely detailed descriptions of the protagonist's activities, which I certainly felt when we were reading the beginning of this poem. I was like, wow, this is slow. And I think it's supposed to be because it is so trivial and it's so detailed in a way that is like drawing attention to the triviality, I think. Okay. So, Pope is known as being sort of a master of the heroic couplet. Him and John Dryden, who we did cut from last week. And so, if you're curious about Dryden, he's also well known for this, which is a traditional form for English poetry, commonly used in epic and narrative poetry, and consisting of a rhyming pair of lines in iambic pentameter. And I cited Wikipedia here instead of one of our more, one of the sources that's usually more thorough. This is actually a really interesting source if you want to read more about it. They give you some examples and things. The poem was originally published as two cantos in 1712, which I can't even imagine. It was only like 390 lines, I think, long at the time. And then Pope expanded it to five cantos, and it's like almost 800 lines. So just a huge, huge addition, more than doubling it. Adding elements like the sylphs, he adds in the set speech, he adds in I think the descent to the underworld is added. So there's like all of these kinds of things that he's like, I could take this even farther. And he does. Okay, so basically, I don't think we have to spend a lot of time on this summary because it is pretty simple just by nature. But basically, this is based on a true story. Lord Robert Petrie cut off a lock of hair from Arabella Fermor, also potentially Farmer, we're not sure. Both belong to prominent Catholic and now quarreling families. And Petrie, he was betrothed. They were betrothed, this couple. Pope's friend suggested that he writes this poem in the hope that a little laughter might serve to soothe ruffled tempers. So just judging by that, you can tell this is not going to be the Juvenalian type of satire, right? This is going to be a Horatian satire. In other words, this is going to be a little lighter, a little wittier, a little bit more like fluffy fun. Ha ha ha. Isn't it terrible we're like that? And so maybe it draws attention to the things you don't necessarily like about society, but not in a way that is like devastatingly cruel and you feel sad and kind of sick after. All right, so poem summary. So Belinda is visited by her guardian sylph, which is basically an air elemental, by the way, Ariel, who warns her to beware of man. He summons other sylphs to protect her. And meanwhile, we see the Baron is scheming. He's got this like altar situation and all this kind of, he seems so evil, right? And he tries to steal the lock of her hair while Belinda's playing cards, but the sylphs prevent him. He actually like kind of snips a sylph, but it's okay. Finally, he succeeds and Belinda's furious. So he gets her hair, right? Then the gnome Umbriel goes to the Cave of Spleen to get a sack of sighs and flask of tears, which he delivers to Belinda, but she won't be soothed. Okay, so I'm not totally sure. It's been a while since I read this. I was like, I can't remember that part very well. I need to reread it. But if you want to reread if you want to read the summary and get a good idea, then you can check out the SparkNotes link. I thought they had a pretty good summary. In the final battle, Belinda tries to get the lock back, but it's lost. And then, kind of in like a beautiful final, moment, epic moment of the poem, we learn that it becomes a constellation in the sky, so it's like forever immortalized, right? This lock of hair. So I don't know. You kind of see what I mean. Like, this is just not comparable to eating babies. This is like, you know, the contrast here would be something like eating babies is so unbelievably disgusting and morally repugnant and severe, right? Compared to something, and then it's talked about lightly as compared to something we have here where we have this sort of like minor incident of somebody stealing hair, which, I mean, I still think is wrong, right? But it's not violent in the same kind of way, right? Obviously, I hope obviously, as cannibalism. And so, and then it's treated with such severity and seriousness. And so I think it's just kind of interesting to see how these two satires are so similar, but also so different. So then let's think about these themes though, because I think maybe it's a little bit obvious, but just in case, he's basically he's criticizing the frivolity of like upper class elite behavior in England, right? And their concerns too. The idea being that there's more serious things going on, and they're like caught up with these trivial, um, you know, problems that they have. I just want to point out too, and again, Spark Notes really coming through. I've never expected this from them, but they say, I thought this was good to note. The strategy of Pope's mock epic is not to mock the form itself, okay? Because sometimes we'll see parodies where the goal is to like make fun of like reality TV or, you know, something like a really serious drama, taking itself too seriously or something. No, this is to mock his society and its very failure to rise to epic standards. Okay, so basically it's like you don't deserve an epic because you can't handle it. You have no idea like what the stakes really are. So he says it's exposing its pettiness by casting it against the grandeur of the traditional epic subjects and the bravery and fortitude of epic heroes. Thus, the mock epic resembles the epic in that its central concerns are serious and often moral. But the fact that the approach must now be satirical rather than earnest is symptomatic of how far the culture has fallen. It's just funny because it's like it's pretty didactic sounding, right, to me, where it's like, I'm going to teach you a lesson, but I can't teach it to you in this way that's like considered like more serious and grave. I'm going to give you what you can handle, what you deserve, which is a mock epic, right? And so anyway, um, I love it. It's it's kind of there's like a pettiness there that I can appreciate. All right. So anyway, I'm very curious what y'all think about this. This is our last lecture of the semester, and so I just want to say I've really enjoyed reading everything that you've been thinking about these works, and it's been really fun researching them and seeing what I think might be interesting to share with you. So anyway, I hope you have a great rest of the semester.